Right, hey guys, how we doing? Back another video from Any News. Some more Eminence in Shadow cut content stuff from season 2. I think we're covering the fight that Cid had with the Witch Queen and how his sister was possessed by I can't remember her name, but yeah, let's check it out. Oh god. I hope
Normally,
my smoke
Eminence in
alarms don't go
Shadow
off.
doesn't miss anything. Every scene is as accurate as possible, and the anime even goes so far as to add its own original content
This was anime original. Oh, okay, cool.
sometimes. Well, when it came to the big fight between Cid and Elizabeth, there were a few creative decisions
Elizabeth,
made
that was
that
her
changed a
name.
bit of the narrative. Beta's adoration was a little less dramatic, Cid's fight was watered down to be a bit less epic, and I'm sure Aurora's possession left some of you asking how.
I mean, it was a little bit confusing, but I thought it was quite cool. Like, I don't. Eminence in the Shadow isn't like an anime that I tend to ask why with, if you know what I mean. I just tend to just take it as it is and just go with it, you know? But if there is an explanation, I'm all for it.
So, in addition to how Cid versus the Blood Queen really went, I'll also clarify all that stuff with Claire and Aurora. It's a massive chunk of lore that's actually quite interesting.
Cool.
One that adds quite a bit of depth to a deeper plot that we don't see much of. Let's get started. Episode 23, The Hour of Awakening.
The Hour of
Covering
Awakening.
Chapter 3 from Volume 3 of the light novel. Starting things off here with Crimson, I suppose one of the first creative differences is the way that Cid had decided to take care of him.
Right, I loved that. Straight up the bat, just like, boom, atomic, gone.
It wasn't a silent nuke like the one that we got in the anime, but instead a series of attacks similar to Atomic Samurai from One Punch Man.
Oh, cool.
Cid had started by slicing Crimson's body in half, but after seeing the Red Moon regenerate him no problem, he quickly started hacking off even more body parts. It was the arms and legs, then torso and thighs, then before Crimson knew it, he was being diced into pieces faster than he could regenerate.
Oh, that's so much cooler. I mean, it was funnier, but this is cooler. It was funnier, the explosion thing, but this is cooler.
Crimson was already on the defensive, but no matter how hard he focused and tried to react, he couldn't even see the blade that was hitting him.
Wow.
It was as if parts of his body were falling off automatically. So, the moment Crimson realized Shadow was a whole universe ahead of him, that's when he would beg to talk things out.
Oh.
A few seconds was all it took to realize that his death was imminent. It was before he could even finish his sentence, though, that Shadow would stab his heart and turn him to dust, leaving no one else but Elizabeth's coffin and the mangled sacrifice in front of him. Cid would then go on to inspect both, but after seeing neither them nor Crimson were the Blood Queen, he would assume she was either missing, never existed, or already dead, leading him to retrieve the 1,000 pieces of gold he left in the vault.
I love that. It was all for the money.
It's when Claire and Mary
That's
finally
brilliant.
arrive after that Claire would actually mistake the sacrifice for Cid just like how she had done in the first episode. It wasn't as drawn out as it was then, but it was definitely a solid few moments where Claire would weep as if the sacrifice was Cid, only stopping after finally looking down
This
and
is
seeing
Cid.
that the
Bam.
severed head wasn't his.
See
It's
ya.
not that big of a deal, but I do find it funny that they decided to recycle the same gag from the first episode. Now, something worth noting about Elizabeth's behavior after this is that it didn't matter whether you were a vampire or a human. If you were a living creature, then Elizabeth would hunt you. So, if you're wondering why she didn't recognize Mary as her once close companion, it's because the Red Moon and her insatiable hunger made her blind to it.
Right, she's just going for anything. Anything to target. Damn, okay.
The only thing she could focus on now was feeding. Had it been Crimson standing there instead, then he too would have been skewered just like how Claire was.
Right.
In fact, it was actually his plan to go into hiding until she was satiated. That was the only way to avoid the wave of destruction she was about to create.
Interesting.
So, with Mary seeing everything around her as nothing more than food,
God.
no one was safe from the inevitable carnage, leading Beta and her unit to step in and stop her.
So cool.
The reason Beta hadn't stepped in earlier was because that realization Cid had other priorities had come too late to her. She wasn't able to figure out that Claire's safety was being left to her fast enough, making her think the entire thing was a big failure on her part. When we get to the ensuing fight with her unit and Elizabeth, this was another scene where the anime had taken quite a few creative liberties.
Interesting.
You see, rather than Rose and 665 being the ones getting caught here, it was actually 664, 665, and Beta. Elizabeth had used her body to hold all three of their swords. Beta was insightful enough to change her sword's form to escape, but with 664 and 665 being novices, they unfortunately didn't see that fast enough. By the time they had realized that was their only way of escaping, Elizabeth was already sweeping downwards with a deadly claw attack. So, the person who had jumped in to save them was actually Rose and her beautiful display of swordsmanship. She had cut Elizabeth's limbs and given the other two an opening to do even more damage.
Damn, it's real, so neck and arms there. Bam.
It was when Beta saw this that she finally understood why Lambda had assigned them to her. The three of them together made an excellent unit. 664 had the leadership, 665 had the wisdom and intellect,
Cool.
then 666 wrapped it all together with incredible battle prowess.
Well, yeah, she's always been pretty impressive with the power and the battle prowess.
They were an incredible team that made Beta think perhaps they could actually win this.
Whoop, whoop.
They
No
weren't
way,
nearly
no.
at the disadvantage she thought they'd be at, and with their offensive seeming to do solid damage, Beta truly believed the four of them together could handle it.
But it's the demonic blood thing, isn't it? Is that what we're going to go on to? I want some more explanation on that.
Even more so when Yukime and the Juggernaut arrived. I found it interesting the anime made it seem like Yukime was trying to flee, since in actuality she was the first one to join the fight out of everyone.
Alright.
You see, as soon as she had made it up the tower, she had instantly offered to join forces with Beta.
My smoke alarm's going off for some stupid reason. For fuck's sake. I know it stopped. Oh, fuck.
If not for Juggernaut storming in right after, then all five of these women would have fought together. Now, Juggernaut's attempt at fighting went on a bit longer in the novels, but what I feel is worth pointing out is the move that Elizabeth had used to beat him. It was a special ability called Mist Form that's typically innate to vampires.
Mist form.
The normal version usually has a lead up that then turns the vampire's entire body to mist, but the one for Elizabeth is a bit more specialized than that. Not only does it turn her body intangible instantaneously, but her mist form doesn't even have to affect her entire body. Whatever body part Elizabeth wants to turn into mist, she can do so freely and without any lead up whatsoever,
Okay, that's
making
a
it
bit-
so she can both dodge and attack
At the
simultaneously.
same time, Jesus.
When Elizabeth proceeded to rain down blood after this, it wasn't 664 and 665 who had protected Claire, but instead Beta and her expertise with slime manipulation.
Cool.
She used her body to cover Claire, hardened slime at whatever vitals were exposed, then used her remaining slime to cut down as many arrows as she could. Of course, several projectiles still got through, but the damage done was mostly to areas like her cheeks, arms, and thighs. As for 664, 665, and 666, the first two were both bleeding out rather quickly, while Rose had managed to protect herself quite efficiently. Whereas 664 and 665 had deep lacerations, Rose's injuries were mostly cuts. So, out of all those present during this deadly bombardment, Yukime and Rose took the least damage, while the Juggernaut and the others unfortunately weren't so lucky. Now, since Elizabeth was able to infect them with what's pretty much a variant of possessed blood, that's how she was able to re-trigger all their possessions.
That was really interesting. I liked that. I was like, oh, damn, we ain't forgetting that. Like, oh, because they're researching vampires initially anyway, aren't they? But, yeah, oh, cool.
Remember, possession is simply an overload of mana. Cid had saved the possessed by giving them control over it again, but with Elizabeth adding one more layer to the mix, her blood and her absolute power over it was able to manually trigger an overload of mana again.
Right, so that's why it was happening.
Beta had tried to suppress it and reduce its output, but no matter how much she tried to control it, the mana inside of her just continued spiraling out of control, eventually causing the symptoms of possession to start and take form around where the blood arrows had hit. Now, it's around here that
Here we
Claire was
go.
visited by Aurora, so if you were confused as to how this happened and what they were talking about, allow me to make things a little bit clearer for you.
Cool.
With Aurora having been freed from the shackles of Sanctuary, her essence was essentially free to do whatever it wanted now. I don't think she could have possessed just anyone, but with Claire now having both progenitor blood and possessed blood in her, it's that combination which brought her closer to the original bloodline. The OG blood that had originated from Aurora.
Oh, okay.
So, since all the girls had been hit by Elizabeth's blood arrow, that meant that all now carried trace amounts of progenitor blood, and it implies that Aurora could have possessed any of them. It's just since Claire happens to be Cid's sister,
She
she's
wanted
the
to
one that
protect him,
Aurora
yeah.
preferred to possess. As for the specifics of what these two talked about, the stuff about evolution was to highlight the difference between choosing to adapt and just so happening to adapt. One theory suggests that apes adapted over the years out of necessity, whereas the other theory infers that it wasn't so autonomous. What I mean is that it's not like the apes knew that they had to adapt in order to survive. What makes a lot more sense to Aurora is that even among apes there were smarter ones and stupid ones. The smarter ones learned how to survive in their harsh environment, and by surviving and breeding with others just like them, the stupid ones would die out and leave only smart ones. This process would continue for generations, and eventually we get to the evolution of smarter apes into humans. So, though the end result for both theories was essentially the same, just because the apes happened to adapt to their environment didn't mean that they did so by choice. No, this wasn't something the apes knew had to happen, but was instead a form of evolution closely tied to Darwinism. How this relates to the next part then is that possessed blood and progenitor blood are a product of exactly that. Aurora's original blood was what was initially being passed down, but since the power within was too much for any single person to handle, all descendants possessing it died out.
Right.
The ones who received it simply weren't able to adapt to it. Somewhere down the line between all the experiments and the creation of the three heroes, though, this blood did split and pass on to others. Except, rather than being the original uncontrollable blood of Aurora's, this time it was either progenitor blood or possessed blood. Both were similarly powerful as we've seen in the anime, but the properties of each were completely different. Not only that, but the division of said properties made controlling the blood way more manageable. So, as the years went on and generations continued, Aurora's blood being split was a product of that Darwinist evolution. Those who possessed it and survived adapted to it, and the result of that adaptation was the possessed blood and progenitor blood. It's not like they knew that they had this magically unstable blood within them, but by being the ones to survive with it, only their bloodlines would be the ones to continue forward, leading to the current day where you either have these vampires or magically gifted powerhouses.
Okay, cool. Love it.
Now, since this blood had split for a reason, it makes sense that neither Claire nor anyone else could handle the two reuniting with each other. The combined result is bringing them closer to the original, and it's their inability to adapt to it that's making their bodies deform out of control like this. The innate power of it is simply too much to handle for them. So, with no way to control it whatsoever, Aurora would bestow Claire with a seal that would teach her how to control it. I don't think it's related to how she possessed Claire, but the seal does grant her power beyond that which she previously had. It provides a way to handle both the mana-rich bloods flowing through her. Okay, switching back to the stuff that Eminence and Shadow is more known for, you'll be surprised to know that Aurora
cool
didn't
stuff.
actually try an I am atomic here. No, that was yet another creative difference from the anime. What she did instead was fight close range with a scythe made of her own blood, then counter Elizabeth's feelers with feelers of her own. The sets of projectiles would then crash into each other, and as the room they were in would fill with this bloody mist, Elizabeth would unknowingly go on to inhale some of it. Since that was the very moment Aurora had been waiting for, what initially seemed like an even battle quickly turned to a one-sided onslaught as Aurora would incapacitate Elizabeth near instantly. With Aurora's blood now within Elizabeth, Aurora could attack from both the inside and outside.
Oh, whoa.
She would make Elizabeth bleed from every orifice, then bombard her with an attack that she couldn't defend against. By the end, all that was left of her was nothing more than a puddle. An unrecognizable pool of red that somehow still wasn't enough to kill her. So, with that being everything Aurora could do as Claire, it was just enough to buy time for Shadow to get there.
Let's
A
go.
dramatic entrance shown mostly from Beta's perspective. Much of her thoughts were mostly the same, but it's the way that they were delivered that made it seem like the situation was a lot more serious. You see, the increasingly apparent feeling that something was off, combined with Cid's lack of offensive movement, made Beta emotional to the point that she was crying. It wasn't a happy emotional like how the anime portrayed, but instead a devastating sorrow since Shadow had actually taken a hit from Elizabeth. He was flung into the wall as if hit by a truck. He didn't actually take any damage, but from the perspective of Beta, it looked like Shadow was losing. And all because he was protecting them. So, Beta would curse her own weakness and yell to her master, all while dragging her crippled body ever closer to the point of impact.
Damn.
She was definitely in no state to be moving, but no amount of pain was going to stop her from crawling to him. It was a truly heartbreaking moment in which Beta thought she was about to lose everything. Of course, Cid was completely fine, but it's the way that Beta perceived it that makes it seem like he wasn't. As for the way things really were, well, despite Elizabeth being even stronger now, Cid's initial confrontation was nothing more than feints. Both seemed as if they were evenly matched, but in actuality they were just trying to get a feel for each other. Where Cid started to look like he was at a disadvantage was when Elizabeth had used her blood to create two clones of herself. They were crimson copies just as relentless as the original.
Damn.
Since the person they were attacking was Cid though, not even 3 of them was enough to catch him. It didn't matter if they came from every angle because Cid's defensive movements made it seem like he already knew where they would attack from.
That's crazy. So, like, with 1, yeah, fair, but you would have thought maybe with 3, with 2 copies, but no, he's just unbelievably insane.
What made Beta think that something was off was that none of these movements were leading to a counterattack. It was as if he was currently being limited by something. I mean, sure, 3 Elizabeths were definitely a lot, but we all know Shadow can easily counterattack anything. He's always dodging with an undetectable amount of movements, then using whatever excess space he makes to immediately shift into a counterattack. Since none of that was happening this time though, Beta could tell that Shadow was sluggish. His movements were slow and he was actually using his sword to block attacks, something he almost never does if he's making his way towards a counterattack. Not only that, but this was also the longest fight that Shadow had ever been part of.
Oh.
So, once Cid had finally gotten hit, that's when he set aside the gold that he was carrying and decided to take things seriously and fight for real.
Oh, right, he's trying to look after it.
A colossal mantle of
class.
energy now surrounded him. He may have looked a little bit smaller, but Shadow was very clearly brimming with power now. A funny thing to note is that Beta did spot a pile of coins back by the wall where Shadow had made impact. She didn't think much of it though, because with Shadow being completely fine now, everything else was just irrelevant.
Yeah, nothing matters.
Now, the way that Cid had approached Elizabeth was by simply walking towards her straight through whatever attacks that she'd throw at him. There was no change in the pace that he was walking, and every projectile Elizabeth threw was dodged with the tiniest amount of movements. So, while Cid was in fact dodging everything, the minuscule motions he made while doing so made it seem as if the attacks were just missing. It was as if Cid was walking in a straight line with zero effort whatsoever, almost like Elizabeth's attacks weren't even worth paying attention to. When a blood clone tried to get close and pressure him, Cid simply dodged before it could even get to him. He then just continued walking without so much of an acknowledgement of them, his focus solely set on the real Blood Queen. Now, for all those who were watching this, only Yukime understood exactly what she was looking at. To her, this shadow figure had attained the ideal. His martial skill was at a level that people could only dream of, the absolute top that could only be described as perfection. So, Cid's footsteps would continue to sound at a constant tempo, then by the time they would stop, that's when Cid would be face to face with Elizabeth. A brief silence would occur as the two would pause and do nothing, yet, as we know with Cid and powerful opponents, conversations are had through their fight together. Cid would then pose one simple question, and it's moments after that that he would know what needed to be done now. So, it was as Cid would charge his final attack that Mary would misinterpret it as one that would kill Elizabeth. She would rush over to jump between her and Cid's blade, but before she could, Elizabeth's feelers would knock her away. This wasn't because Elizabeth was still on the offensive though, but instead more so an indication that Elizabeth had finally remembered her. Reason being that, while she was using her blood to knock Mary away, she was also staring gently towards her as if to say that she was sorry. A clear indication that this wasn't the same bloodthirsty Elizabeth from just a few moments ago. Atomic recovery would then heal everyone everywhere, and that would be that for the Blood Queen fight. The only thing worth mentioning after is that Beta and the others now have some form of vampiric powers.
Cool.
The extent of them aren't really known, but after being exposed to progenitor blood, Beta is able to manipulate her blood now. But yeah,
Sick.
That's pretty much it for this episode. I know I said I would do every 2, but surprisingly this episode had quite a bit going on for it. So, what do you guys think about all this lore stuff so far?
Love it.
Is it something you think complements the show, or are you just watching Eminence for the funny Cid stuff? Let me know down in the comments.
I mean, I'm watching it for the funny Cid stuff, but it's still nice to know all the lore stuff on these. I loved it. I loved it.
But anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time.
Ciao. Very cool, very cool, love it. Love the Eminence and Shadow, love the cut content, love knowing what was missed out. I love the explanation as to why Cid's sister was possessed by Aurora. That's awesome. And yeah, cool. Check out my Etsy shop. Go buy my t-shirt I designed. I love it. It's awesome. Buying that helps support the channel. And thank you to my patrons. If you want to have your name at the end of every video I upload, links in the description to the Patreon page. $1 a month for our support channel. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you for that. Thank you all for watching. What do you guys think of that? What do you guys think of this? Click like, subscribe. If you haven't already, leave comments down below. Let me know what I should watch and discuss in future videos. I'll see you guys. Nate down.